Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And when it comes to EVE news, I think we've had a slower week in EVE Online. We do have a new proving grounds that's coming in with new faction frigates, basically 2 versus 2 if I'm not mistaken. But other than that, I haven't spotted that much new news. I also do think that basically everyone is now holding their breath for the patch with all the actual industry changes hitting the game. That should be pretty interesting when it does happen, both just in-game for industrialists, but also perhaps for miners, for almost everyone, and then also, of course, for the market. So, not really sure. Perhaps there is some last-minute speculation on all of that, or is everyone just, have we taken our positions? Are we holding our breath? And will we see probably next? I'm expecting it next week. I'm not 100% sure, but probably next week we should then see that patch with all the changes, and perhaps, some miscalculations will have major impacts on the market. It could be very, very cool. As always, we'll also take a quick look at the new Eden store and see what's happening here. So we get a couple bundles, mostly actually apparel bundles front and center. We've got the Ghosts Hex skins. All right, quite a few of them actually, and then the Gila Vampire Hex skin. So then these actually, in my opinion, look pretty cool. Look at this succubus. That is in line with what it looks like for Sancha ships, but then with that orange lighting, you could say, yeah, actually this very cool, very nice effects on this one as well. But this one could be really cool. Look at that Crewer Vampire Hex skin, yeah, also with animated green lightings. This does look, man, those are cool skins, I have to say. Might be worth taking a look at that. Anything for the ship's item to fly? Well, we got a vampire skin for the rattlesnake. That ought to be pretty cool. Unfortunately, not as much animated green as I would then like to see. Maybe something that was a little bit more prominent. But this does look very cool, and I, in fact, despite the fact that I have been using the, up here it's pretty cool, the rattlesnake quite a lot, and it would still be my go-to for like very heavy grinding, I would say, for like level 4s and other content, because the golem does attract attention eventually. I still don't have a skin for that one, so these, in my opinion, do look exceptionally cool. Definitely worth a look at, and we don't have anything other to notice here. Quick look at the services also. Is that a little bit off? 5.5 for 12 months instead of 6,000. Yeah, indeed. So you have a slight discount for 12 months Omega if you are willing to spend 5,500 plex in one go. All right, let's take a look at what's happening on the market then. And as always, we're gonna start with plex and stuff. And that is coming in. Let's take it up here, and coming in at 325. Here we go. Here is the plex chart to start out with. So we did a nice little recovery from 2.2 million to 2.4 million, and here now the market is hesitating a little bit. In fact, it's been hesitating for most of the week with a little bit of pressure at the tail end. We are currently selling plex for 2.4 million and then buying plex for a little bit less than 2.3 million. So slight bit of pressure. What's of course not going to help is stuff like this. When someone is selling 12,000 plex in a single sell order, that is going to keep us in check. So it does look like some supply has come online here all of a sudden. To bring a lot of plex to the market and convert that to liquid ISK. Maybe a part of this rush on demand could be what we just saw in the New Eden store, where you could basically get a month free if you buy 11 months of game time in a single go. But overall, and maybe after that, right after that rush, which then initiated a little bit of extra buying for people that wanted the liquid ISK, now that they see that higher price, we're currently perhaps in a slightly oversupplied situation as we basically absorb everything that happened. The weird thing is that we don't really see that much in volumes to actually tell that stories, but perhaps there's a little bit of that happening in the background. Next up, we have the multiple pilot train certificate that are certificates that are already showing a completely different story in going way back down very quickly. So that's not good news for those that are hoping for higher plex prices on their investments. 1.2 million for the sellers, a million for the buyers, and then buyers, yeah, they're basically in the Tranquility Trading Tower, and that is the price range. And that's definitely at the low end of this chart already. So if this is has any predictive value for plex, we could be looking at potentially a double dip here. I'm not really sure that the market would be willing to go below 2.2 million, but very interesting to see what's happening here with the trading certificates. After that, we've got the skill extractors that have managed, I would say, a more orderly plateau above 280 million on average. But yeah, it's coming in. 280 now for the first seller, 268 for the buyers. And if you look at the Tranquility Trading Tower, I really should have done that. 271 in the nearby trading hubs. I'm going to quickly take a look at that for plex as well. No, that's in competition with GTAB, but not really undercutting that by that much. So, and quick look here, still at 1.2 million. Yeah, they're almost desperate at the moment to try and sell their training certificates. So skill extractors definitely showing signs of pressure now. That's not showing up on the chart just yet, but it will by next week. Then the impact on the injectors. Here are the large scale injectors that have a little bit of a bounce, which I think is normal, right? This is probably the response to what happened with plex itself. It's always a little bit late. You always do have a little bit of a delay between something happening in plex and then something happening in the large scale injectors. And here it is. We have this jump up from, well, sometimes average prices below 600 million going back up to a 620 range. Sellers are coming in at just below 620, 588 for the buyers. That's still a pretty big margin, and any reasonable amount of supply is going to put more pressure on the price here. And yeah, looking at what's happening with trading certificates and with plex, I wouldn't be surprised that that's what's coming next. Small scale injectors already showing that pressure, so basically quickly making a top, a small top at around 130. Well, it's actually less than that. It's probably, no, it's actually just above 130, and already feeling that pressure at the moment. Yeah, going back down to 125 for the sellers, 116 for the buyers. So this may have been a little bit of I would say a fake increase and a fake bottom. Potentially, we'll have to see, of course, in the upcoming weeks, but this did feel like, all right, the market is shifting. We're going back into a more inflationary mindset, taking plex as that hedge against inflation. But after that increase, well, from 2.2 to 2.4 million, we clearly see now that the market is not sure that this is something it wants to continue. Then we've got the daily alpha injectors continuing a slow climb back to 45 million, which is a more than respectable price. Almost 45 million for the sellers, and then 40, above 40 for the buyers, doing its own thing and having a very strong performance. After that, we've got the hypercores that are also stalling in their recovery, basically. Currently selling for 250, almost 260,000 ISK, and 244 for the buyer. So a bit of a recovery here, but clearly not a straight upward trend that has started just yet. Then we have the mineral markets that's coming in at 850. Let's take a look at these. First of all, we have the titanium chart that is staying pretty flat, just below 7 ISK, which I would say is not a bad performance. 698 for the sellers in GTAB. We should definitely put that filter back on. So basically 7 ISK for the sellers and 656 for the buyers. Some decent volumes coming in with 420 million, 300 million here, 200 million here. But considering what we saw in the monthly economic numbers, we're probably still in that rush mode. Everyone that is still now putting in industry jobs at the current BPCs will see those complete with the current price tags, you could say, and as a result we are still in that rush, which is probably helping Tritanium maintain that 7 ISK price. What's going to happen after the patch hits? Well, my expectation is that we could definitely see a crumbling of Tritanium demand, but HiSec is still very popular for mining, quite understandably so, especially newer players, right? They can mine in relative safety here, they can build up their yields, make those investments in skills before then, you know, deciding on, all right, how do I want to risk things? It's I think a path that's taken quite often for potential miners in EVE Online. Well, I don't expect the supplies to just drop off in order to maintain the prices of around 7 ISK, so I do expect to pull back a little bit after the patch hits. Then we've got Pyrite that did a spike up to 35 ISK and is currently comfortably sitting in a 25 to 30 ISK price range. We're talking almost 30 for the sellers, 25 for the buyers. Some 250 million units here are probably going to stabilize us for a little bit longer, but overall I feel like this is definitely something that Pyrite will probably be able to maintain, because you don't have that big drop off in needs that you do have in Tritanium for the Pyrite market. And I will take a look at what I would probably focus on if I were mining in HiSec. Here is Mexalon going for still almost 200 ISK on the chart, crazy premium compared to its historical average. Yeah, almost 200 for the sellers and almost 180 for the buyers. Definitely your focus if you're mining for HiSec, and those volumes are still up quite substantially. For Pyrite, it's already recovering back down, but if I'm not mistaken, well, Mexalon has that unique quality to it that it does tend to be one of the first bottlenecks in the Nosik production cycles, and so as a result I do expect this one to maintain a decent premium and to remain your focus for HiSec mining. Then we've got the Isogen chart that did a nice peak up to 70 ISK and basically fell back down to 50-ish range. We all know what I'm suspecting to be the reason for that, those big reserves that still exist out there. 55 almost for the sellers and just below 50 for the buyers. And then you can see the competing sell orders. It's still 60 million units, 40 million units, 28 million units. I'm not sure if that holder of those 2 billion units of Isogen watches EVE Talk, but what we saw after the order disappeared was that his sell orders were still very recognizable, because he always used the same kinds of volumes. And now perhaps to try and you know, get the market into a more, which is what I would personally do, right? To try and get the market into a more you know, flowy state where it doesn't expect those big volumes to necessarily or constantly come back to the market and keep prices in check. Switch it up in your volumes, right? Put one of 40 million, then one of 35 million, then a big one, then a smaller one, so that you're slowly selling at ever higher prices. That would be my personal tactic. And well, looking at what we're seeing here, I mean, we still have a couple of old ones with very big volumes, but other than that, we're not seeing, all right, someone is dumping at 3 to 5 different price ranges, the exact same volumes, then you know, and that's one and the same player that's you know, betting on many different basically playing the roulette by filling the roulette board, which you know, always feels like, what the hell, let's just be patient with that. He must have more ammo out there. And so if you can get rid of that feeling, perhaps we can start our slow climb from here already, despite the fact, yeah, that there's probably still way too much stuff, Isogen out there for the current needs of the market and industry. Then we've got the Noxium chart that's continuing to make all-time highs. I'm gonna say, I want to say, I'm not exactly 100% sure, but it's bound to be pretty close to that, above 2000 ISK. Definitely, I would say all times since I started playing. To my feeling, I mean, this is, you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but to my feeling, I've never seen Noxium, you know, at almost 2100 ISK a unit, and buyers coming in at 1900. That is very expensive. And of course, I would say, you know, if you want to risk something in low sec, mining for Noxium could be very nice, even in the smaller ships, of course, less risky, less costly ships. Moving on to nullsec, here is the Zydrine chart. All right, this one is continuing a pretty sharp decline from 2000 down to 1300 for the sellers and 1200 for the buyers. Here, well, we saw those monthly economic numbers. We saw a crazy output from a single nullsec region. All right, very high likeliness. I'm still not willing to say, all right, this is all botting. Probably not. There's definitely some human interaction and some human, I'm gonna say, motivation behind all of that, but automation could definitely be a big part of that standout volume and number for that one nullsec region, and this is probably the result of that. So that's what we do have to keep in mind, and I mean, I fully understand that it's a reality that in China, for instance, the mindset around fair play is completely different, right? Anything goes tends to be the mindset, the cultural mindset there. You know, if you don't take advantage of anything that you can, then you expect someone else will, and as a result you'd be on the losing end of that. But in a game like this is the result. They're destroying their own market, because while you know, everything else is nicely holding its value, it's probably crashing Zydrine because of those supplies coming from nullsec all of a sudden in quantities that you know, without botting we would never be able to achieve. Their net result is actually not going to be as much of an advantage as they think. They'll lose it quite quickly, because they're basically making Zydrine free for everyone. So that's really the drawback, that anyone that's botting, this is showcased here in my opinion, this super big counter trend all of a sudden here in Zydrine that has always been more expensive than Oxium and is now you know, way cheaper than Oxium, which is also not a very natural situation in my opinion. So yeah, you know, they're basically shooting in their own foot by doing this. Next up we have the Megasite chart. That's actually a little bit flatter, willing to stay above 600. This 630 for the sellers and 587 for the buyers. Still basically not recovering to its former glory as being the most rarest and most expensive mineral for Tech 1 production. And then finally we get the Morphite chart that's also able to maintain its price quite easily, going for 65,000 for the sellers and then 63,000 to the buyers. Honestly, the Zydrine chart is very weird, completely counter to all trends despite these higher volumes. And so this is pure speculation on my part, I will fully admit that, but I would not be surprised that that's the case, that those big volumes in nullsec in that one region have focused on what's the unique item we can make and what's the most valuable of those. It is Zydrine, but as a result, you know, that artificial extra supply does tend to just devalue the good that you are supplying. So yeah, it's always a double-edged sword in any economy, I would say. So Morphite still very expensive at the moment. Next up, we've got PI. That's coming in at 1745. Quick drink though. Like that. Let's take a look at what's happening here. So we get the broadcast notes. I just saw a post on Reddit as well. Excuse me, I hope that didn't come through too loud. But I just saw a post on Reddit as well with more keep stars being destroyed in Imperium space through the war. Probably will require more infrastructure to be placed as well, and so as a result I would say that yeah, it's able to hold its current value, not, you know, the normal average, but definitely a nice recovery and still able to stay there. Almost 1.7 million for the sellers, almost 1.6 for the buyers. Construction blocks taking a little bit of a beating right at the tail end here, so is also trying to recover, but still sellers coming in at 8,400 for most of them, buyers below 8,000. That is still very cheap. Consumer electronics confirming that pressure seems to be back, managed to climb back to almost 9,000 ISK on a couple of days, but we're back under pressure. 7.4 in fact for the sellers, 6.8 for the buyers, 6,800 ISK. That's very cheap again. Look at where we start off the year at 10,000 ISK. You can see that as an average for the first part of this chart, but note that before this, PI used to be even more expensive. I would put 12.5 or something like that as the historical average that I've experienced for consumer electronics. Then we've got coolants, same thing, did manage to make its way back to 8.6 or something like that. And then here at the tail end, that pressure is back, 7,400 for the sellers, 6.6 for the buyers. Then cryoprotectant solutions, tied to minerals, actually doing a little bit better, climbing back away from that 100,000 disc on the upside. But supplies coming in very quickly, and look at that, sellers are already below 100 again, 92,000 for the buyers. So the pressure just seems to be uniform in these specialized and not advanced but refined PI materials. Well, here's an exception, enriched uranium, but let's take a quick look at that. So average prices coming in at 9.4, sellers coming in at 9.4, buyers at 8.9. All right, there's an exception. Enriched uranium is still doing quite well. If we keep in mind what the rest is doing, I wouldn't be surprised that that's where some supply shifts, and that will start to go down there as well. Integrity response drones, also a bit of pressure, but able to keep most of its gains. 1.9 million for the sellers, almost 1.9 for the buyers. Quite competitive here at the current price range. Pretty damn impressive considering what we're seeing in most of the other goods. Then mechanical parts, it looks like it may be recovering, but again, still below 8k. That's not great. 8,100 for the sellers, 7.2 for the buyers. Average prices well below 8,000 discs. So yeah, mostly we're basically dumping between these two. So some people do buy for 8,100 discs, but a lot of people are also willing to sell at 7.2, creating this average price. For the nanites, had a little bit of a recovery away from 5,000 discs, which is really not that great, but also at the tail end here, clearly a little bit of pressure building. 5.7 for the sellers, 5.4 for the buyers. All right, nano factories up to last week did really well to maintain 900,000 discs. Bit of pressure here. We're talking 850,000 for most sellers, 800,000 for the buyers. So probably one of the least well recovered items here. Organic mortar applicators. Well, this one did shoot all the way back up to 1 million ISK, to basically a 1-year high point on this data point. So a little bit of a pullback from that is quite normal. Let's see what price it can defend. Also 860 for the sellers and 800,000 ISK for the buyers. So that 850 seems to be defendable for the cheapest advanced PI materials. And then here, recursive computing modules. That one's actually not doing that well, selling for 1.1 million, buyers just above a million, normal price 1.5. So that one is still basically lagging behind a little bit. Robotics is slowly trying to get back to 70k, which is still 30% below the regular price that I would have experienced. 68,000 for the sellers, 61 for the buyers. Still very cheap, basically pulling away from the bottom. Self-harmonizing power cores, another one that's done really well, getting back to 2 million and still very close to that. 1.95 million for the sellers, 1.75 million for the buyers. Bit more margin here, so we can clearly see that any major supply is going to start to put pressure on this one, but very impressive chart. At the end here, sterile conduits still going for above a million. Yeah, 1.1 for the sellers, above a million for the buyers. That's pretty good too. Then our Yukomi superconductors. Let's see here. 77,000 for the sellers, 65 for the buyers. Yeah, I was always looking for, can we ever really dip below 50k? That's where I would love to buy this stuff, but it's just not materializing. And then finally the wetware mainframes that are still around 175, almost 175 for the sellers and 1.7 for the buyers. Another very narrow margin, able to maintain most of the recovered price increases of the last couple of months. So advanced PI still doing quite well in maintaining most of the gains or the recovery that it's done, but everything else does seem under pressure, so we gotta be quite careful, I would say, with PI still. Advanced moon materials coming in at 23.45. Let's take a look at these. Honestly, here I'm not expecting too much. As I've said, I do kind of think that there may be some speculation in some stuff, but mostly I think players will be like holding their breath, waiting to see let the patch hit. Will it actually be a good patch, or will we have problems within this? We really don't know exactly what's going to come, and as a result, you know, for here in PI, for instance, you get a bit of a holding pattern in most of it, a bit of pressure, right, a bit of dumping maybe, but nothing too major, and that's exactly what I'm expecting here as well. So let's take a look at it. We've got the first of all, carbides for Galente. Man, I'm really not awake just yet. It's actually the top one. Crystalline carbonite, basically a little bit of pressure from a 1 year high point. So 186 for the sellers and 185 for the buyers. So very narrow margin, very expensive, but basically pretty regular stuff, coming back down a little bit from those highs. Then we've got the Caldari one, which is, that's metamaterials, so it is here, titanium carbide. All right, double spike it seems. Are we back at 350 for the sellers, 340 for the sellers, 300 disc for the buyers, back to an almost 1 year high point. Very, very expensive. Basically, the Caldari part of the Tech 2 world does still seem to be very volatile, the most volatile of all of these Tech 2 markets, which could be very good news if you want to speculate a little bit, of course, on Tech 2 ships. Then for Minmatar, for Fernite Carbide, we have a big volume spike that's currently driving the price up a little bit. No, oh, that's here. God damn it, misclicked. It's here. So this is the chart. All right, that makes a little bit more sense for these carbides that should have been a little bit more expensive at the moment. Basically, we had double spikes up to 200 disc. We're at 175, and then we're actually going back up a little bit. 192 for a couple, 200 disc for most sellers, 185 for the buyers. So still a very strong performance here. Basically, the volatility because of these high prices seems to be going on. And then finally we get tungsten carbide for Amar. That's doing the same thing. Another spike up to 253 at the moment for the sellers, 241 for the buyers. And then just a couple of days ago, we were still selling at 290 for tungsten carbide. So these carbides still very expensive and actually starting to have some volatility to them at these high prices as well, which is quite impressive and could be good if you're looking for volatility in the ships and perhaps modules as well. Then for our metamaterials, it really hasn't translated just yet. Let's see if that is changing this week. Definitely not for Galente photonic metamaterials, going for 13,500 bars at 12.9. Basically flat at, well, a reasonable price considering the first 6 months, slightly below average price considering the full year chart. On non-linear metamaterials for Caldari, we had a big spike up above 30k. We have recovered from that, but look at today's daily average. That's looking like a 28,000 almost. Sellers at 27,700, 24,000 for the buyers. So here non-linear metamaterials again in the process of shooting up. So that Caldari volatility still reigning supreme. Then we've got the Minmatar plasmonic metamaterials, basically bit of a spike that has been covered and currently trading at, I would say, a normal price. 17,000 for the sellers, 16 for the buyers. And finally, terahertz metamaterials, also a nice spike, but that's been fully recovered already, and we're down to 16.4 for the seller, 16,000 for the buyers. So these metamaterials, except for the typical Caldari volatility, have basically recovered from their spikes and are currently in normal ranges. Then most of these other advanced materials had seen quite a bit of pressure in the last couple of weeks and months here. Fermionic condensates, apparently big volumes, increased prices, should have seen a little bit of extra demand, up to 73k for the sellers, and so a little bit of a buying spree has caused that price to recover back to, well, average prices pretty much for the chart, you could say. Then we've got ferrogel recovering from a spike back down to 35k. There's not that much to say to this one. Fullerenes, all right, a little bit of a double wave up from 1,000 discs. So this is interesting. If that behavior starts to happen, then you could say that fullerenes will have recovered, in my opinion, if it can stay above 1,000 disc. 1,150 almost for the sellers, just below 1,000 for the buyers. There is still this threat that supplies will eventually drive us back down, but for now, I would say that this is not a bad range for fullerenes. Hypersynaptic fibers, That one is, yeah, basically pulling away a little bit from 9,000 ISK, but clearly still trading very badly. Nano transistors back down below 5K, so that's what we don't want to see. Right before, I do remember this, like a whole year of nano transistors, 5,000 at the low end, 6,000 at the high end, just depend a little bit on the available supplies, and which is what the Fullerites is in right now. But if we break through that 5,000 barrier, then be careful. It could go very fast. 4.9 for the sellers, 4.8 for the buyers. It is a narrow margin, so perhaps not. But this is not a chart that I personally feel very confident in. Then we got phenolic composites slowly making its way back. All right, not bad. Almost 1900 for the sellers, 1800 for the buyers. And then ceramic fibers, actually, all right, big volumes and shooting up to a 1 year high point, 800 for the sellers, 523 for the buyers. This will be the one exception here that's probably tied to the changes that are coming for industry. Probably a lot more buying and preparations to actually keep your factories up and running after the changes hit the servers. And that is why now, well, ceramic fibers is going for a very, very pronounced 1 year high point, over double its starting price of last year. Next up, take two ships, but I'm gonna drink again a little bit. It's actually starting to get a little bit hotter, so with that better weather, we gotta keep hydrated. Let's go, take two, 30, 40. Actually making good time on this one, that's nice. Let's see if there's any speculative stuff that we could do. Well, at the moment, Basilisk, very expensive at 250. If you happen to have invested in those, you know, at low points, you can sell them for 268 million ISK. Buyers coming in at 240. That is definitely a good opportunity to sell. The question is, will we eventually go back down? At the moment, of course, everything is very expensive production-wise, especially for Caldari that have both re-peaked pretty much to high points. And that's actually confirmed by the Cerberus. That's climbing to a 1 year high point as well, up to 350 million ISK, 353 for the sellers, 291 for the buyers. Very, very expensive. Well, those that were patient enough or still happen to have some of these Cerberus that they bought for close to 200 million or well below 250, you are looking at a very nice sell opportunity right now. So Caldari, 1 year high points, definitely the name of the game so far. Then we've got Amar that's continuing its slow and steady recovery and actually increase in price at the moment. The Garden currently selling for 250 million, buyers coming in at 211, and I still have a Guardian that I bought for 184. That's starting to look pretty damn juicy. Definitely a nice bit of profit to be taken on this one if you want to. But it's a difficult choice, right? This is the third ship. Third cruiser class hull, you could say, that is basically still increasing in price. This may be the trend, of course, that will continue after the changes hit. Here we have the Hound that started this last week and is currently selling for 31 million. Buyers coming in at 27 million. Forced up as well. Do I happen to have holdings for Hounds? Yeah, I actually have Hounds. I think it's 4 or 6 of them that I bought at 22.5 million. So we're also looking at a little bit of a profit on that Tech 2 investment. And so I said it, you know, unfortunately, Path of Exile has absorbed all my time, but a couple of weeks ago I actually mentioned this, that everything is in volatility and everything does have that upwards pressure to it, except for those stealth bombers. There were definitely a couple of buy orders, so I'm really curious in the Hound, right? That is actually an old investment of mine, but in the Hound, we see that, yeah, buying here would have made a lot of sense. I'm curious to see if the others have followed. Last week that was not the case. You see, last week basically we still had, I think, a buy opportunity in Manticore, or maybe it was the Nemesis and the Purifier. I'm not sure. We'll take a look. Then the Ikitursa actually going up as well in price. That could be kind of worrying because this does start to feel like a general trend in Tech 2. 823 million for the sellers, 732 for the buyers. Then we've got the Ishtar that is, all right, recovering a little bit from a 1 year high point of almost 280 million, selling for 245, buyers at 230. Yeah, that starts to be the question now, and I think what we'll have to look at for the Tech 2 market here, what will be that new range, that new trade range. Where will be, what will be the cheap price? Will it be below 230 for the Ishtar? I definitely don't know at the moment. Then we've got the Manticore, excuse me, and here we are. Prediction coming true. Very, very nice. So we noticed that we had this soft landing to 25 million basically last week, and we saw what the Hound had started to do already. It started to make its move. We saw what's the Basilisk, what's happening with the Cerberus, and here it is. So Manticore, let's assume that you could have bought for 25 million. You're currently selling at 32 to 33 million already. 29 for the buyers, pushed up as well. So yeah, god damn it, Path of Exile came in the way, but this was a trade that I was actually kind of planning to do. I just never managed to pull myself away from that other game, losing out on that opportunity. But if you have, then yeah, you already are looking at profits. And honestly, if you would still hold back a little bit on selling everything, I wouldn't blame you, considering what we're seeing here, for instance, in the Cerberus. That's entirely possible. That yeah, the market is still adapting, and that when the changes actually hit, we'll have an interesting Tech 2 market on our hands. The Munin is basically back in the middle, but is able to stay there quite easily, which is actually pretty exceptional for this one. 238 million for the sellers, 213 for the buyers, still having a very big margin. And so here, Minmatar, if you could buy one of these for close to 213, and you eventually expect, if your expectation is, which I think can happen, is that Tech 2 will actually move to that higher range under just basically the full pressure of what we're seeing here, right? We've got the changes to the Marauders that has basically started sucking up a lot more build materials, pushing those prices up. That should eventually have an impact on Tech 2 ships. Then we've got industry that's probably going to increase prices for Tech 1 production as well, make everything more complex. So that could actually increase the premium on Tech 2 even more. So overall, I think that there's a lot of things that could be pushing these prices up, and that means that, well, if we look at what's potentially happening with Caldari at the moment, then investing in Minmatar ships could be interesting, of course. Next up, we've got the Nemesis. There we go. Last week, could have probably bought for 22.5 and below, and we're already selling at 33 million ISK. Buyers coming in at 23 million. They're not willing to push back up just yet, but here, so as a result, if I had made that trade last week, yeah, I would sell my Nemesis right now, because you're probably looking at a 30% profit, close to that already. Very, very cool, of course. I hope that some of you guys followed that and that you could make a little bit of ISK on this. Then we've got the Oneros confirming the trend apparently for bigger ships. Yeah, we're back up again, close to that 1-year high point of well above 210, 221 for the sellers and 187 for the buyers. Here volatility clearly back, because just a month ago we could have bought this for 180. Then we've got the Panther, 1.4 billion almost on the chart, 1.45 for the sellers, 1.3 for the buyers. That's the premium. I'm really happy actually that I've got these Black Ops battleships in here. So they're not the volatile stuff that happened with the Marauders, but they are also big Tech 2 ships to produce, and so they're good barometers, I think, for production cost. And at the moment they're saying, yeah, we're pretty damn expensive. So that's clearly something to note. Then the Purifier, I had already started this volatile period, but just a couple of weeks ago you could have bought this for probably close to 26 million, and it's now trading for almost 34 million ISK. These stealth bombers have followed what was happening in the logistics cruisers, in the heavy assault cruisers, basically in the Tech 2 market in general. And if you invest here, going for some bigger volumes, I usually go for, well, definitely less than 10 stealth bombers at a time. But here, if you'd gone for bigger volumes, I think that would have been a good choice, and that you're now looking at profits potentially for the foreseeable future. Unless there is this one unknown, of course. If CCP comes out with a dev block that is going to, change Tech 2 production and make it cheaper, then you're left holding the bag, of course. There's always a risk. Let's keep that in mind as well. Then here we've got the Scimitar, also way back up to 250, pretty damn impressive. 253 for the sellers, 218 for the buyers, and again last month could have bought these for well below 200 million. The Widow, all right, bit more volatility, so this one going back down, but still we're talking, let's see, for the sellers almost 1.3 billion, 1.2 billion for the buyers. Remember just a couple months ago when we started looking at these, you know, it was are we above a billion or below a billion for the buyers? So it's really clearly still a premium that we're paying. And then the Zealot is also a little bit late to the party, you could say, at the moment, selling for 210, buyers at 194. Does feel decently cheap if you look at the full 1 year chart, but overall clearly away from its bottom range as well. Next up, Take 3 ships. That's coming in at 39.30. There we go. Let's see what's happening here. So I've said it last week, my expectation is not too much, honestly, especially if we're in a holding pattern, and we may actually be here because of something else as well. We still don't know what could happen to Take 3 production, and that may get an overhaul eventually as well, which could disrupt this market. But as a result, I don't think anyone wants to disrupt. We got a good thing going. 48 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers, which is pretty much in line with where we were. That jump here has been absorbed, and now basically the Confessor doesn't have any fresh supply, but still has 40 of these to keep things basically nice and pinned down at this current price range. Then let's see if any of the others is what's been drawing the supply. Yep, so the Hecate went above 50 million, because see, at the end we are starting to go back down a little bit. 51 for the sellers, 47 for the buyers, but look at that, last 24 hours, well, half a page with some 30 plus ships coming in here into sell orders. That is going to start to put that pressure back on the Hecate and potentially could drive it back down below 50 million decently easily. Then we've got the Jackdaw that basically also had a spike to still recover from, and that's now at 50 million, 48 for the buyers. It's going to be a little bit easier with 160 units right here. But again, and then a couple days ago we had 70 here. So the competition is starting, and this is the reason why the Confessor doesn't have too much supply. Now, honestly, there's still a premium, and it's pretty slow to my feeling. So it could be that the Confessor has a couple million upside potential, right? All of this could have, once this is absorbed, we could be looking at 50 million Confessors pretty soon. So if you can still buy them for 44 million, which is going to be very difficult to materialize at the current price, considering you know, the current supplies. But if you do manage to do that, then you are potentially looking at a little bit of a profit, because I do think some upward pressure now will happen in the Confessor. And then we've got the Zwepel that is already starting to see that as well. I would say going back above 45 quite easily. 48 million for the sellers, 42 for the buyers, and fresh supply, yeah, like 12 ships or so, 13 ships in fact, in the last 24 hours, and then a big gap here. So the Hecate and the Jackdaw are seeing that pressure towards 50 million, are drawing in the supplies, but that definitely leaves, I think, a little bit of room for Confessors and Zwepels to go back up, and we'll probably meet at 50 or just below 50 million for these ships. So it's a slight move up in price range, but it's quite slow and steady. It's definitely not Twitch tradable or anything like that. Then we've got our cruisers, with the Legion continuing to meander at, I would call, a decently high range, 185 to 171 for the buyers. Then we've got the Loki, that's actually moving back up to the high end of its 200 million range, 200 for the sellers, yeah, basically on a lack of supply, 180 for the buyers. Then the Proteus is actually going up to a 1 year high point, all right, impressive. 202 million for the sellers, 182 for the buyers. And the Tengu, I think, was also going back up, yeah, back up to the higher end of its 200 million range as well. 195 for the sellers, 175 for the buyers. For the cruisers, again, it is that unknown here. I could say a couple things could be happening. First of all, market manipulation. I mean, 100 ships a day, considering, you know, the amount of Tengus that are on the market, doesn't take that big a wallet to buy out up to a certain range or anything like that. But number two, perhaps a little bit of speculation now on CCP also revisiting Tech 3 production eventually. Right? If you want to be early to the party, which quite often is definitely a good idea when it comes to trading. Right? If you want those profits, then you need to make a move on something that you expect to happen, but you're not sure is going to happen. And then, of course, that would be, well, right now we have Tech 1. If then we see Tech 2 industry getting a dev block, getting an overhaul, and Tech 1 has definitely become more complex and more expensive, then Tech 2 could see the same thing, and then Tech 3 could see the same thing again, and then buying some Tech 3 ships to be ready for that could just be the ticket. So that's interesting to see, despite higher activity in wormhole space, which we've seen from those economic numbers, that we're not seeing lower prices for Tech 3 ships as a result. So what's happening here? Well, we'll have to wait and see in the upcoming weeks, especially after the patch hits. I think it's going to be an interesting period of time. Then we've got our extra product, and considering those proving grounds, I'm going to take a look at the faction frigates 4440. Like that, kind of want to touch on those again. Frigates will start as always with the pirate factions. Like this, let's see what these are going for. So the Astero 55 million, basically normal price range, which is maybe a little bit surprising, although we have this April, late March recovery in the ship. I would say you could expect a little bit more interest in the Astero because of the new potential drops from the data sites, but yeah, for me that's also quite died down quite a lot, that excitement. It's definitely super rare in HiSec, so really going after that in HiSec doesn't feel like it's worth it. I'd rather just keep hunting for a good combat site than grab a couple of data sites at this point already. Then we've got the crew, are actually pretty expensive, but also 55 million ISK, 58 for the buyers, 47 for the sellers, 47 for the buyers. That's actually quite expensive. Next up here we got the Daredevil. That's, well, going back down, but it's at 67 million, so that one's always quite expensive. Still, it's definitely at the lower end of its range, so quite a mixed picture so far. While the Dramiel is working its way back to 40 million, actually kind of cheap. 41 million for the sellers, but on its normal average. The Garmer, alright, big spike here in the Garmer up to 65 million, and then on new supplies we are back down decently quickly to 50 million, but this is definitely tradable. This is definitely a tradable wave, or even spike you could say, in just a couple of days. That's impressive. Then we've got the Succubus, that's actually a little bit down, less than 42 million for the sellers, 35 for the buyers. So this is definitely interesting in the sense that you're seeing there's not that much supply, but it doesn't take a lot of supply to be oversupplied. That gap is starting to open up, and the buyers just aren't there. So potentially, I would say it is probably possible to buy a Succubus well below 40 million, is probably 36-ish, something like that. And looking at the chart potential, that's not that bad. Then we've got the Worm, that's also actually trading pretty low at the moment for its range, 52 for the sellers, 44 for the buyers. So a couple of exceptions, but definitely some pressure in the pirate faction frigates. Then Navy factions, let's take a look at that. So here's Kaldari Navy Hookbill, 1 year high point, very impressive. 19 million for the sellers, 17 million for the buyers. If you bought any time last year, especially here for 10 million ISK, you're looking at doubling your price potentially. A bit of a volume spike, but not really something that I would say is probably the proving grounds. Well, interesting, doesn't seem to have that much of an impact here just yet. 14 million for the sellers, 11 for the buyers of Federation Navy Comet. That's actually high end of its normal range. Imperial Navy Slicer is taking off though. That one is currently selling for 17 million, buyers at 12.3, and just a month ago you could have bought these for less than 10 million ISK. So that's a nice proving ground speculation that you could have made. Republic Fleet Firetail, a little bit above average. Yeah, 12 million for the sellers, 10 million for the buyers, but nothing too big. Skybreaker, what's that costing these days? 88 million, 70 million for the buyers. You know what, it's expensive, but it's definitely doable, I would say. Crucifier Navy issue, very nice spike up to 25 million ISK, down from 12.5 or something like that, so doubling in price here. Recovering from that, but it's still 20 million, so very expensive, probably tied to the Proving Grounds Griffin Navy issue, making its way back up, well, actually a little bit above average, but not by too much at 18 million. And then the Mollusk Navy issue on its average as well here, so 17, not a lot of availability. A little bit of volume spike though, so 15 on the chart, 17, yeah, supplies come in very quickly to get rid of these, it seems, and you don't need that many to plug the gap. And then finally, Visual Fleet issue, also pretty much average. So a couple of standouts, and it seems to be the MR ones. Crucifier Navy issue and Imperial Navy Slicers clearly taking off, together with the Caldari Navy hook build that was actually already trending quite high at the moment, you could say, on this chart, trading it at that 15 million range for a couple of months. That has now just shot up to almost 20 million ISK. So those Proving Grounds, I mean, we definitely need to, understand all the details, and apparently quite often stuff like faction modules are actually not allowed in the Proving Ground. So I was speculating that that's the reason why we sometimes saw really big spikes in some of these modules, but that doesn't seem to be the case. That just means that, man, the potential for trying to time the market there for explorers can be absolutely huge. But in the ship hulls, of course, there is definitely some ISK to be made on announcements, or speculating on announcements from CCP. And for now, they basically are, I think, still doing the same ones. So they haven't developed new Proving Grounds just yet. And yes, it could become, unfortunately, a very predictable one where it's going to be very hard to take advantage of. But then if CCP would all of a sudden come out with a new type of Proving Grounds, that is of course where the ISK could be made if you are holding the right ships. So that's going to be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.